A 16-year-old boy sitting in 24 degrees Celsius, window seat, knees against the tray table, headphones around his neck, was the only person on a smoke-filled Boeing 737 at 40,000 feet who knew exactly what to do. Not the captain, not the first officer, not the 4 flight attendants. Him, 147 people on a red-eye from Vancouver to Chicago, somewhere over the dark nothing of Lake Superior, and the only trained mind still functioning in that cockpit belonged to a kid who hadn't started 11th grade yet. How? That's what this story is about. Before we go any further, drop a comment below. What state are you watching from? I read every single one. And if this is the kind of story you came here for, subscribe. There are more coming. The button's right there. It costs you nothing. Now let's go back to the beginning. His name was Marcus Webb, not Marcus the pilot, not Marcus the hero. Just Marcus. 16 years old, 5 feet 9, wearing a faded gray hoodie that said Nelson Physics Bowl 2019 across the chest in letters that had started peeling. He had his mother's eyes and his grandfather's stubbornness and a backpack stuffed with 3 aviation textbooks, a worn spiral notebook, and the kind of careful, self-contained silence that gets mistaken for shyness. He was traveling alone. His grandmother was in a hospital in Chicago. His mother had put him on the plane the way you put someone on a plane when there's no other choice, pressing her hands against both sides of his face at the departures gate and saying something he couldn't quite hear over the terminal noise, but which he understood anyway. At the gate agent had asked him 3 times if he was traveling with an adult. Unaccompanied minor, he'd said, showing his travel documents. You sure you're okay flying by yourself, hun? Yes, ma'am. What he didn't say, he'd logged over 200 hours in a flight simulator by the time he was 14. His grandfather, retired Air Canada first officer, 31 years of service, had spent the last 2 years of his life teaching Marcus everything a cockpit would ever ask of a person using a simulator rig in a converted garage in Winnipeg that smelled like engine oil and burnt coffee. His grandfather had died 8 months ago. The aviation books in his backpack had been his grandfather's. The flight attendant who checked on him after boarding, a woman named Diane with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, offered him a blanket. Long flight, she said. You want something to read? I'm good, Marcus said. He held up one of the books. Already have something. She smiled the way adults smile at quiet kids they've already decided are fine. Then she moved on. Marcus pulled the book open, but he wasn't reading. He was watching the door to the flight deck, a habit his grandfather had given him. You always know where the cockpit door is, his grandfather used to say, not because you expect anything to go wrong, because attention is what keeps things from going wrong. He opened his notebook to a blank page and wrote one word at the top, Grandpa. Then he closed it and watched the lights of Vancouver disappear beneath the clouds. Marcus had been 9 years old the first time his grandfather put his hands on the controls. Not a real aircraft. The simulator. A full-scale 737 replica his grandfather had built piece by piece in that Winnipeg garage over 12 years. Sourcing decommissioned instrument panels, a salvage control yoke assembly, 4 monitors for the wraparound display. The neighbors thought Raymond Webb was building a boat. He wasn't. The first session, Marcus had barely been able to see over the glare shield. Raymond had sat in the right seat, calm as a man reading a newspaper, while Marcus gripped the yoke with both hands and tried not to let the horizon drift. What do you see? Raymond asked. Everything. The instruments. Pick one. What's the most important thing in front of you right now? Marcus scanned. The attitude indicator? Why? Because it tells me if I'm level. Raymond had nodded. Before speed, before altitude, before anything. Level first. You lose level and nothing else matters. He paused. Say it back. Level first. Every time, even when everything is screaming at you. Especially then. That phrase, level first, everything else second, had become the foundation of 2 years of training. Not casual backyard flying games. Real training. Raymond taught Marcus avionics the same way he had learned them, systematically, seriously, without shortcuts. They covered normal procedures and abnormal procedures, engine failures and electrical faults. They ran smoke and fume scenarios until Marcus could execute the checklist without looking at it. Once, late in the second year, Marcus had asked, "Grandpa, when am I ever actually going to need this?" Raymond had taken a long time to answer. He was quiet the way people are quiet when they're choosing words that will have to last. "I don't know that you will," he finally said, "but I know what happens to people who don't know something when the moment comes for them to know it." He looked at the instrument panel. "I had a crew member. 1994 flight out of Toronto." He froze. Not because he wasn't brave, because he was unprepared. And the gap between what he knew and what the moment needed was exactly wide enough to cost us everything. He stopped. "I brought everyone home, but I never stopped thinking about what he must have felt, standing at the edge of that gap." He turned and looked at Marcus directly. "I'm not raising someone who will ever have to stand at that edge. Here's something most people don't know about smoke. In an aircraft cockpit, it's not always from fire. Electrical faults, particularly failures in the avionics bay just below the flight deck, can produce smoke that looks and smells identical to a structural fire, but requires completely different emergency procedures. Pilots trained for one and encountering the other have made decisions that escalated incidents into disasters. The checklists are different, the responses are opposite. Knowing which one you're facing versus guessing is the entire difference. Raymond Webb had run that specific scenario with Marcus 14 times. Marcus didn't think about any of this as he closed his eyes at cruising altitude. He was thinking about his grandmother, about her kitchen, about the particular yellow of her curtains and whether she was sleeping or watching the small TV they'd moved into her room. He was not thinking about the faint discoloration he'd noticed in the air near the overhead vent when he'd taken his seat. He noticed it anyway. At 40,200 feet over Lake Superior, Flight 2847 was running smooth. In the cockpit, Captain Dale Osworth, 53, 26 years with the airline, 6 months from retirement, was telling his first officer a story about a fishing trip that hadn't gone the way he'd planned. First Officer Nina Castellano, 31, 3 years on type, recently transferred from regional routes, was half listening and half monitoring the FMS, which was tracking their LNAV path north of the lake. The autopilot was engaged. The sky outside was deep black with a half moon to the south. They were a good crew. Not close friends, but professionally comfortable. In the cabin, Diane had finished her service round and was sitting in the rear jump seat. In 14A, a man in a business suit had fallen asleep with his reading light on and a contract spread open across his tray table. In row 31, 2 college students were sharing earbuds, watching something on a laptop. In 24 degrees Celsius, Marcus Webb had his notebook open. "She looks smaller," Mom said, "but her eyes were the same." He paused and looked at the window. The lake was invisible below. Just dark. Just the reflection of the cabin lights in the glass and his own faint outlines staring back. Then the vent above, row 22, exhaled a thin curl of gray. Marcus closed his notebook. He watched it for 30 seconds. Thin, acrid. The smell reached him before anyone else noticed, because he was already paying attention to it. It wasn't the smell of something burning. It was the smell of electrical insulation. He knew the difference. He'd been taught to know it on purpose, by a man who loved him enough to make him learn things he'd hoped he'd never need. For a moment, Marcus told himself he was wrong. He told himself this the way 16-year-olds tell themselves things when they're terrified of being right, quietly, firmly, and without much conviction. He leaned forward and looked down the aisle. 2 other passengers had noticed the haze. A woman in 21 billions was fanning the air in front of her face. A man 2 rows up was pressing the call button. Diane appeared from the rear. She walked forward at a pace that was professional and deliberate. Not running, but not slow. Marcus watched her pick up the forward phone, watched her speak, watched the door to the flight deck open from the inside. From where he sat, he could see the angle of light change when the door opened, and in that brief moment, he saw what was coming out of the cockpit. Not a thin curl, a billow, gray-white smoke rolling out of the flight deck door like something had already been burning for a while. Captain Osworth stepped out with his hand over his mouth, eyes watering, face the color of chalk. He said something to Diane that Marcus couldn't hear. His voice had the kind of forced calm that sounds exactly like panic, trying very hard. Then the captain went back in. Then he came back out. Then the lights in the cabin flickered. The passengers heard the lights before they saw anything. That quiet electronic stutter, 1, 2 beats, and then the aircraft nosed down a fraction of a degree that felt, at altitude, like a stomach drop. Several people grabbed their armrests. The man in 14 had jerked awake. Diane was on the phone again. Her hand, holding the receiver, was not steady. Marcus was already standing. He didn't make a decision exactly. It was more that he recognized the gap his grandfather had described, the distance between what the moment needed and what was currently available, and he simply stepped toward it. "Sit down, please," Diane said, moving toward him. "Ma'am?" His voice came out steadier than he expected. "I need you to listen to me for about 30 seconds. She stopped. Something in his voice made her stop. "Stay with me here. Because what happens in the next few minutes is the part nobody ever talks about. And once you hear it, you won't be able to forget it." He stood in the aisle, hands out, not aggressive, not dramatic, just present. "That smoke is coming from the avionics bay. It's not a fire, not yet. But the procedure for this is not the same as the standard smoke checklist. If they run the wrong one, they'll kill the buses and lose primary displays. I know the correct procedure. I can help." Diane looked at him, looked at the smoke drifting into the forward cabin, looked back at him. "How old are you?" 16. "My grandfather was a first officer for 31 years. He trained me. Please, before they run the wrong checklist. I want you to think about what you would have done in Diane's position. A boy, an aisle, smoke. Hold on to that thought." Diane picked up the forward phone. Captain Osworth came to the door with his eyes still streaming. He looked at Marcus the way most adults look at teenagers in crisis situations, not with cruelty, but with the particular exhausted certainty that this was not helpful and he did not have time for it. "Son, I need you to go back to your seat." "Captain, the smoke profile is consistent with an avionics bay short in the forward electronics rack, not a cabin fire. If you run the standard smoke elimination checklist, you'll isolate the wrong bus. You need the non-normal procedure for electrical smoke, starting with the avionics cooling selector." Osworth blinked. Behind him, Castellano appeared in the doorway. Her eyes went to Marcus, then back to the captain. "Dale?" Her voice was quiet. "He said avionics cooling selector." "I heard him. That's not on the standard smoke checklist." A silence passed between them. Not long. 4 seconds. But in a filling cockpit at 40,000 feet, 4 seconds is a long time to hold a thought. "What's your name?" the captain said. "Marcus Webb." "Marcus, if you're wrong about this, I know." Marcus met his eyes. "Run it and see what happens. You'll know in under 60 seconds whether I'm right." Osworth looked at Castellano. She gave him a look that Marcus would later describe as the most expensive trust he'd ever seen one person hand to another. The captain stepped back. "Come in." Marcus grabbed the back of seat 24A as he moved forward. His fingers brushed the tag on his grandfather's backpack. Raymond L. Webb, AC retired. The handwriting he'd known his whole life. He felt it under his thumb like a pulse. He didn't bring the bag. He already knew everything inside it. The cockpit was a different kind of dark. Not dark exactly. The instruments were alive, throwing amber and cyan light across the panels. But the smoke had thickened into a haze that made everything look underwater. Marcus moved into the jump seat and strapped in before he consciously decided to. His body remembered what his mind was still catching up to. The smell was sharp, chemical, electrical insulation breaking down under heat. His grandfather had made him smell that same smell on purpose once from a controlled sample. "You need to know this in the dark," Raymond had said. "You need to know it before you're afraid." He was afraid now. He just also knew what to do. "Avionics cooling selector," Marcus said. "Overhead panel, left quadrant." "I see it," Castellano said. "Move it to override. That isolates the cooling fault without killing the bus." Her hand went to the selector. She looked at Osworth. He nodded. The selector moved. 10 seconds. The smoke didn't stop. But it slowed. Just slightly. Just enough. Okay, Marcus said, and he heard his own voice, as if from somewhere slightly outside himself. Level first, everything else second. Now we identify the rack. The master caution. Elect bus fault, forward rack, Castellano called. It came up 2 minutes ago. We thought it was secondary. It's not secondary, that's your source. Rack cooling failure caused the insulation breakdown. We need to kill power to the forward rack only, not the whole bus. There's an individual isolation breaker. Circuit breaker panel, row 12, second column. Osworth pulled out the physical checklist binder. His finger moved down the column. He stopped. It's here, he said quietly. His tone had changed. Not belief, something more serious than belief. Engagement. He was with Marcus now. Pull it, Marcus said. The circuit breaker came out with a clean, definitive click. The smoke stopped, not gradually, immediately, like someone had closed a door on the source. For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. Then Castellano said, "Restoring primary display power." The PFD came back fully bright. The horizon appeared, clean, sharp, and completely indifferent to what had just almost happened. "Good horizon," Marcus said. He hadn't realized he was going to say it until he did. "Good horizon," Osworth echoed. A reflex, a pilot's reflex. Then the VHF radio dropped out. No static, no signal, silence. Osworth reached for the backup. The backup squelched once and went quiet too. Marcus ran through it fast. Forward rack isolation took the comm system with it. Backup antenna on the same bus. VHF-1 is separate. VHF-1, he said. Left comm stack. It should still be up. Castellano was already reaching for it. Chicago Center, Alpha Charlie 2847 declaring emergency, electrical smoke event, flight deck, we are smoke-free, requesting direct vectors to O'Hare. Static. Then, Alpha Charlie 2847, Chicago Center, we have you. Squawk 7700. Clear direct O'Hare, turn left heading 040, descend and maintain flight level 240. Emergency services standing by. Under the professionalism in that voice, if you were listening, there was something else. The controller had been waiting. The controller had been afraid. Marcus leaned back in the jump seat and let out a breath so slow it barely made a sound. Then Castellano did something he didn't expect. She reached back, without looking, and put her hand briefly on his arm. Just for a second. No words. Eyes stayed on the instruments. It was the most out-of-place thing that had happened in 12 minutes. Which was exactly why it stayed with him longer than anything else. The descent took 22 minutes. Marcus stayed on comms and called 3 more abnormal items. Not because Osworth couldn't manage them, but because 2 sets of eyes in smoke-thinned air are better than 1, and the captain had already decided to use every resource available. Level first. Everything else second. He had the horizon. He had the frequency. He had 22 minutes. At 400 feet on final, the captain called the runway. At 200, Castellano called stabilized. At 50 feet, the radio altimeter counted down and Marcus felt the vibration of the nose gear extend through the jump seat frame. The mains touched. Thrust reversers deployed. The aircraft rolled out, and then it was quiet. The runway lights slid past in the windows, amber and white, steady, indifferent. They didn't know what had just happened. They just kept burning. The same as always. Marcus became aware of his hands first. They were shaking. Not violently, just the fine, almost molecular tremor that comes when a body spends a long time holding something tightly and finally lets go. He pressed his palms flat on his thighs and watched them until they stopped. Osworth set the parking brake and put both hands in his lap. He looked at the instrument panel for a long time without saying anything. When he finally spoke, he didn't turn around. "How many times did you run that scenario?" 14, Marcus said. Osworth nodded slowly. 14. That was all he said. Castellano ran the post-emergency checklist, voice steady and methodical. When she clicked off the interphone, she looked at Marcus directly for the first time since he'd walked in. She didn't apologize for the initial doubt. She didn't explain herself. She just looked at him with an expression that said, "I see you." Then she turned back to her instruments. That was enough. In the cabin, emergency vehicles swept red and white light across the tarmac. When the doors opened, several passengers cried quietly, the way people cry when the thing they were afraid of finally becomes safe to be afraid of, in retrospect. Diane found Marcus near the front of the jet bridge. "Is your grandmother going to be all right?" she asked. "I hope so." "She raised someone good." "My grandfather did," Marcus said. "She helped." He pulled the backpack strap tighter on his shoulder. Raymond L. Webb, AC retired, the tag, the handwriting, the weight. It felt different now. Not heavier, just more clearly itself. 3 months later, Marcus was back in Winnipeg. He'd given his statement to the TSB investigators, answered their questions with the same careful precision his grandfather had modeled, and gone back to school where exactly 3 people knew what had happened and the other 400 treated him the same as before. Which was fine. His grandmother had come home from the hospital in February, moving slower but still with the same eyes, the same kitchen, the same yellow curtains. He went back to the garage on a Saturday in April when the snow was melting and the air smelled like wet concrete and old wood. The simulator was exactly as Raymond had left it. Instrument panels, control yoke, 4 monitors, dark and patient. Marcus sat in the left seat for a long time without turning anything on. His grandfather's notebook was open on the console. The last entry Raymond had written, a list of scenarios still to cover. Scenario 14, electrical smoke, avionics bay, forward rack, was checked. Scenario 15 was not. Beside it, in Raymond's handwriting, "Save this one. You'll know when." Marcus read it twice. Then he looked up at the blank monitors. He'd been turning a question over since that night. "Here it is, and I want you to genuinely sit with it." His grandfather trained him for years, ran this exact scenario 14 times, and in the moment it mattered, everything worked. But was Marcus ready because Raymond trained him? Or did Raymond train him because he somehow already knew Marcus would be ready? Is readiness something you build into a person? Or is it something that was always there, and the right person just had to recognize it? I don't know. Marcus doesn't know either. He told me he asked Raymond a version of this question near the end. He asked, "What if the moment never comes? What if I learn all of this and nothing ever happens?" Raymond's answer came without pause. "Then you'll be the safest person on any aircraft you ever board, and every person sitting near you will be lucky, and they'll never know why. That's not a waste. That's the best possible version of this." Marcus closed the notebook. He reached forward and powered on the simulator. The monitors came to life. The horizon appeared, clean, artificial, perfect. He put his hands on the yoke. If this story moved you, I have more where this came from. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and leave a comment below telling me which moment stayed with you. The cockpit, the garage in Winnipeg, something Raymond said? I genuinely want to know. Because the best stories are the ones that stay. The simulator hummed in a Winnipeg garage, throwing blue light across a boy who already knew things most people spend whole careers trying to learn, and who was finally, quietly, alone enough to miss the man who gave them to him.